Welcome, and thank you for listening to the Inspired By podcast, a sharing space that invites genuine connections with passionate, spiritual, and creative specialists that are inspired by spirit and walking their soul path with grace and the intention of touching and inspiring others from the heart. My name is Maya Abushtid. I'm a medicine woman, a shamanic practitioner, and a preparation and integration facilitator. I offer one-on-one and group medicine ceremonies on a regular basis, and I organize and hold retreats with emphasis on preparation and integration processes. I hope you enjoy and get some inspiration from this episode of Inspired By podcast. Hello, inspirited world. Hello, everyone who is inspired by spirit, two-legged, four-legged, no-legged. I would like to welcome you all to this new episode of the Inspired By series of episodes that I've been recording since a year now, almost, or less than a year. And in this episode, I'd like to welcome Bob Cohen to Inspired By Ouroboros Story Hour, hosted by Bob Cohen. Welcome, Bob.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hello again. It's so good to be with you. I'm excited to share this time with you and hopefully through you inspire others in the few words that we're going to be sharing together.
That sounds great. Thank you.
I'd like to start with a little bit of introduction about you, Bob. So Bob Cohen is the boy who lived. He was reconceived in 2013 after surviving atherosclerosis and a financial disaster, and reborn in 2015, following a high dose of psilocybin journey. Since then, he has devoted his energy to family and to excavating and studying the unconscious mind, his and the collective unconscious, and the role languages play in shaping it. Bob teaches writing at several colleges in Boston, produces and hosts a live stream and digital story platform called Ouroboros Story Hour, True Tales of Healing and Altered States. And he writes poetry and fiction. Bob is currently looking for a publisher for several collections of poetry, including Whiskey, Cool Jazz, and Ayahuasca excursions into flow state. This is a journey on the road to joy, Swadaji, and artifacts of improv. Wow, that's a lot of books on poetry. I mean, I can I can really say that, wow, I would love to at least read at least one of your books at some point, or maybe today, if we get a chance for you to share some of your poetry with us, that would be wonderful.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm sitting on a fairly large pile of stuff, probably about, oh God, probably about eight or 9,000 pages worth of stuff, actually.
Wow, that's, this is kind of your legacy somehow. Can we call it this way?
Well, I hope so. That's why I'm looking for publishers. It's, right now this is stuff that's sitting on a hard disk and some work I've shared with some folks. And I guess since probably, I guess for like the last 2 years or so, 2.5 years, I've been publishing my like individual poems in an online journal called Burn Before Reading magazine. So it's sort of a burner, like a burner focused online publication. So that's been fun. So I've had like 3 or 4 pieces in every issue for the last 6, 7 issues, maybe 8. There's one coming out pretty soon, actually.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I would start to wish you all the very best in finding the medium and mediator for your books to reach out to the people.
Thank you.
I'd like to share first that I know Bob online, like many of us who are meeting each other online. And I think more than a year ago, I think sometime early 2021, someone referred us to each other and we got in touch with each other, and Bob proposed to share my story on Ouroboros Story Hour. And it resonated so much in that time. And you know, yesterday I checked that episode. It's season 4, episode 6 of Ouroboros Story Hour. And I checked that again and I re-listened to that part, at least the part that I shared. And it kind of touched me again. It's like listening to myself again, sharing what I shared and where I was at a year ago really helped a lot. So what a great opportunity, really. I'd like to start with asking you, Bob, what inspired you to start opening a space for people to share their stories?
Well, funny story. Back in 2014, as I alluded in the bio, I was in a difficult place in my life, we'll say, and I had tried every kind of solution that the guys in the white coats could offer, and none of them were working. The psych meds were making me sick. The therapy wasn't helping, and I was really at my wit's end at that point. In fact, in 2014, there was a day that I was in my garage with a rope around my neck, standing on a ladder, and the only reason I didn't kick it out was because my kids, who were small then, would come home and find me, and I just couldn't do that to them. And so I got out, I dismantled it. And as it happened, I had been doing some reading about studies that in what New York University were doing, in Imperial College of London and Johns Hopkins University. They were doing studies about psilocybin. And I remembered in the way back when, right after I graduated college, I had an opportunity to try mushrooms recreationally. And I thought, wow, that was pretty fun. Let's see what's here. But it was sort of like that. And then also I just knew, and this happens sometimes, I just knew that it was the thing. I read it, I knew it was the thing. So I found a research conference in New York called Horizons, Perspectives and Psychedelics. I went to the conference, and during one of the question and answer sessions, I very cheekily asked the crowd where I could score drugs, because I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anyone from whom I could buy mushrooms. And so I got the laugh out of the room. Somebody in the room kind of saw me, came up to me at the end of the day and said, "I know somebody. I wanted to meet you." So we had a chat about my situation, and she kind of like heard what was really going on beyond the sort of like getting a laugh out of a big room. And then the next day she came back to me at the end of the conference and said, "Here you go. Here's a number. Call this guy." So a few months later, I end up in an apartment on the Upper West Side of New York City, and had this first powerful journey where I took 5 grams of psilocybin, which is a lot for those who don't know, and it created this big shift. So I keep on going back to this, so I still don't have access, and it was very expensive. So I kind of like, I kept on going back to that conference. And in year 3, I met some folks who were very deeply involved in the New York psychedelic community, the underground part. And I got invited back to an apartment in in Brooklyn, which is, the hipster capital of the world, in Bushwick, which was the center of the hipster capital of the world at that time, in an apartment in Bedford-Stuyvesant, which was the epicenter of the center. And I'm hanging out at this place, and I'm talking to this one of his roommates, and happen to refer to that story, and she goes, "That was you? We all thought you were a cop." Because, I mean, look at me, like, short hair, white male, disappearing, like all that stuff. So, I could see where they would do that. So we had a big laugh. And one of the people that I met there, a guy by the name of Lex, said, I do this storytelling thing. And can you come back to Brooklyn next month and share this story? So here I'm in my mid-50s, I'm pretty settled in life. I have children, I have a house, yada, yada, yada. And so I'm just so tickled to be at an after party in Brooklyn at 4 o'clock in the morning that I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll come back. I said, but I'm going to need a place to stay. So he said, well, sure, come. So a month later, I'm couch surfing on Lex's couch in Bushwick. We go to this place called Hellphone, and I share the story. And I enjoy being the center of attention and sort of speaking to people. And I found it very, I was going to say cathartic, but it's not quite the right word. I was starting to learn how the stories that I tell about my reality give a shape to it, and that I have a certain amount of control about how that works. So I do this thing, and I just love it. Lex comes to Boston because that's where I live. A few months later, he's doing a thing at Northeastern University. He invited me to come share the story again. I shared the story, and I'm like, I got to do this. This is I got to do this. And I didn't want to wait around for other people to invite me. So I got connected with some folks at that conference. I got connected with some local folks in Boston in the psychedelic community. And I said, hey, I want to do this thing. Do you guys all want to come? You want to go along for the ride? So by August of 2017, I had found a space to rent. I found people to come and share stories, and it's been a thing ever since. So here we are 5 years later, doing this thing.
Wow, what an interesting foundation for that. These major events that happen with us that usually are very, very critical ones, where if we can define it in few words, like when we hit rock bottom and we don't know what to do about it, and then something starts opening up in terms of communicating it in order to touch others in many ways. And what a great way to mediate that through the web of mycelium. I mean, when it comes to the psilocybin world and those teachers, I mean, wow. They are the communicators, they are the web, they are the technology, everything that revolves around those terms.
It really is, because one of the most amazing things was when I did that 5-gram journey, I remembered the visions that I had when I did the first one back in 1980. So I was in Bremerton, Washington. I was hitchhiking around the country. What do the Australians call that? A walkabout. I was on a walkabout. So somebody handed me a giant baggie full of Liberty Cap mushrooms. They were wet. I just took a handful and ate them. And then I found myself sitting in a canoe in this inlet, because they were right on the water, but it was a quiet little inlet. And I see this duck kind of pop up out of the water, and then he kind of kept on going around the cardinal directions. It was north, south, east, west, and then that kind of came back, and it was it was almost as if that foundation, that idea of having a clear compass was established, with my first meeting with the mushrooms. And that sort of came back, and then this direction came to me as a result of that second, that second experience.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah, it's just I mean, when it comes to these, master teachers, I have no words to express how they've been also teaching me in so many ways. So we are blessed, that's what I can say. And somehow the connection that has been built between us was mediated through the world of plant medicine, and I'm grateful for that. And since that connection that happened last year, there was a way to also put words onto my story, onto what I lived in the world of plant medicine, which till now I'm finding it still a kind of refinement of what kinds of words I use, because words really have impact. I mean, there's an energy behind the words we speak and the words we choose to say. And I feel that probably because I'm a Gemini, there's a lot of kind of concise way of doing things. At the same time, sometimes I'm like, just chill, just connect in a way where you use simple words. That's it, and without complication.
Yeah, it's what for me. I kind of like look at it as like the words and story come together, and what I've learned in my medicine work and in my writing and in doing story hours, that the stories we tell about our experiences are really what shape our reality, and we have the ability to discern how to explain what's happened to us. And what's wonderful about story hours that I encourage people to do it unscripted, so that they find the story as they go, because we all have like our canned stories about things. And so if you write it down, that's where that's the story you're going to tell. Whereas if you do it in the moment, you can, it's brilliant. Like, you can watch people sort of like fumble to find, if we look at it from an Aristotelian point of view, like they fumble to find the inciting incident, for the rising action, to figure out where where the pivot point is, and the falling action, down to the story's conclusion. And they find it in real time, and they're grasping for the words as they share, and it all kind of like comes together as a whole after the fact. And we often talk about integration as an important aspect of doing medicine work, whether it's plant medicine or traditional psychedelics. It's like we get this information, now we got to figure out what to do with it. This act of finding, groping for story in a safe place with people who are open to receive it is, it's really powerful.
Indeed. And, I relate to so many points that you just shared. One of them is how we tell our story shapes our reality. And it's fascinating because the story that we tell, even if it's the same story that we lived, every time we tell it, there's a new element to it somehow, based on where we are at in the integration, be it, after ceremonies or after a big hit, whatever the hit is, a loss or anything that we go through. And I relate to another point that you mentioned, which is what I'm also personally finding a bit challenging, which is writing my story. I'm not able to do that yet, because there are so many things that I feel that somehow are missing out when I put it in a text. It's like I'm going to define it, and I don't want to define it somehow.
Yeah, it's a big struggle, and especially because a lot of my work sort of involves ineffable things. And writing, when you boil writing down to its most basic elements, it's language put in a two-dimensional frame that requires that requires what's the word I want to say? that's very linear in fashion because you're top. I mean, Arabic, of course, reads from right to left, but in English, we read from left to right, and so it's top to bottom, left to right. So that you have these challenges of temporality, these challenges of having like our brains work multimodally and in multidimensionally. So when we sort of perceive or think of something, we're getting signals from lots of different places all at once, and our brain tells a story about it. And writing becomes a little more complicated to do that. And so it's very much like painting with oil, in the sense that painting with oil, painting lives in well, I mean, not so much anymore, but traditionally painting lives in a rectangle or a square, and it's really pigment and lines. Mm-hmm. So and tones, and so we find the means that we need to fool our brains into that, to get into that space of multi-temporal, multimodal, and that, like, that's the art and craft of writing.
Yeah,
it's just that simple. And I share that frustration. I mean, there are days where I'm like, and I'll just go like, what the hell? Like, how am I gonna say this? So, with all crafts, there are techniques and there are ways to approach those moments of stuckness.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What I find, Bob, is that I'm able to write poetry, to express through poetry instead of text, let's say text in a way, much better when, touching on that ineffable, on that art form where the choice of words is not defined by a specific way of putting down a text and relaying it, right?
Of course, right? Because you're relying on things that are not that are other than literally following words. You're making meaning in a different way, because mm-hmm. in poetry we rely on rhythm, we rely on metaphor, simile, mm-hmm. like these things that are suggestive, and we also rely on our readers putting in work. Mm-hmm. So I do that because I teach freshmen. I teach college writing, and I always put in a unit of poetry because my students are accustomed to reading for information, not for meaning, and they're most accustomed these days to reading stuff on social media. And so it's people skim, they don't read for meaning. And I spend a whole month on it. In fact, I'll say, we're reading poetry for a month, and they all grumble. I go, but by the end, like, they start to understand this idea of meaning making versus information consumption.
Right. And you're basically helping them raise their sensitivity, right? It's like mm-hmm. opening right. a new portal within, or just refining their senses in a way, and mm-hmm. exploring which sense they can really tap into in their unique way, right?
But precisely, because I'll tell them, like, you have to know the meanings of every single word in a poem, because somebody agonized over every word, and if and intentionally placed that word in a particular slot in that two-dimensional matrix to convey some kind of meaning. So if you skim that and get the gist versus understanding, versus letting those words resonate throughout the whole poem in all the directions, you lose some of the meaning.
Right. So if we can just touch a bit on storytelling again, in a way where there's an expression that is visceral, that is personal, but also that can be held somehow in the bones of the person. When it comes to stories, for me, I've really touched on that part within that is connected to either ancestral connection, and that has been somehow imprinted in my bones, and how that story unfolded for me was an essential part of my own healing. When we say storytelling is medicine, how do you read that?
Well, yeah, it is medicine because what it does is it allows you to sort of it if I don't want to put this in a judgmental way. When we're most open and we have as much of the our as much information as possible available to us to process and experience, we pick and choose those things. We pick and choose what details we're going to focus on. And when you do that, like that concretizes a way, a point of view about the event. And this happens, if, it's really kind of how trauma hurts us. So we have events in our life where they're not so good. I'm sorry, I'm not finding the word I want, but we have these things happen to us, and then we remember pain and we remember what comes after that. And as we reprocess, when that happens, we tell a story about what's happened to us. And then we repeat that over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so you kind of get locked into this, this way of looking at what happened to you. And I know that the neuroscientists will say that the more we draw on particular memories, the more the more calcified, as it were, the pathways to the memories become. And so what happens in Story Hour, and what I strive for people, is to help them to feel comfortable enough to look beyond that burnt in memory that we have.
Yeah.
And then as we do that, then we start kind of like moving some of the pieces around.
Yeah.
And we start thinking about, well, okay, I know this is how I usually tell that story, but is that really true? And when you're witnessed, and especially when and I've been blessed, and I guess I'll take a little bit of credit for this. I think I usually make people feel comfortable in those spaces, when they feel like it's safe to look beyond that story that we tell, that the one that hurts, the one that casts us as victim, the one that just that keeps us like churning over and over and over again how we got screwed over. It opens up the field more, and then you can kind of like share things that you might not regularly even share with yourself, never mind other people. And then when you do that, you've reformed the memory. You've taken, and this is bad. And it's not like, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. This is literally like taking that set of mnemonic molecules and reassembling them in a different way, and then that becomes the story you remember. And when you do that, and you're in a healing space, then it allows you to sort of like move on from that, that set of mental models that keep you locked into the suffering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what a great way to put it in terms of under the theme of integration. I mean, if we can really explain integration, especially for people who will be listening to this episode, it is very much related to this neurogenesis, this neuroplasticity of expanding from beyond the identification between us and the story we lived or that happened to us, and kind of disintegrating from that to reintegrating into a different form that would create this new neural pathway, this new way of seeing things, not forgetting, but actually seeing from a bird's eye view, or from like an eagle eye view, or more from a kind of an embracing a vision instead of an excluding. I mean, when we're talking about integration, it's really about inclusivity. And you explained it in such a beautiful way, because to me, when I you know, when you welcomed me on that episode of Ouroboros Story Hour last year, I mean, I was shivering because it was the first time that I speak about that story in front of people, just outside the very small circle that knew the very details of that story. And this story is still ongoing. I'm still following up on some little pieces from it, because obviously there has been a lot of pieces that have been distorted within me too. So it's
Sure.
about refining that. And storytelling, especially in a safe space, you know, you touched on many aspects here. In a safe space where there's no judgment, where there's no, my story is better than yours, especially if I experience this plant medicine. Oh, I've seen this and this is better. How are we, and how many times? I mean, I've heard in retreats and outside retreats, outside a space that is more like hosting people, the stories about, you know, how this happened and there's competition. And I'm like,
Yep.
the story that is yours, when you own the story, you're able to really let go of it. And until you are not able to see yourself fully in that, then you won't be able to express it, and therefore let go of it, let go of this identification with it. And that's so beautiful, Bob. And I'm assuming this is how also you witnessed the evolution of Ouroboros Story Hour, how it
Yep.
started, right?
Yes. And one of the, I mean, this was a flow state thing in the end, because I, you know, had these things happen. I found a place where I could, where I could do this, and the because it started out in person, and we were at a place called Makeshift Boston, which was a co-working place. So it was this little storefront in the South End of Boston, and there were all these people that sort of like were psychedelic friendly, but also very social justice friendly, and so they viewed conversations about plant medicines and psychedelics as a part of that conversation for social justice. And they were so generous with me. I mean, this is, you have to, but you know, Boston's a big, expensive city. They were, I don't want to say the numbers, but they made what they charged me for a night was an amount where I never, ever, ever had to worry about people paying to walk in the door in order to keep this thing going. And so it was sort of like I could always, it was a low enough money where it was a low enough amount of money, even in my financially difficult situation, where I could always give them what they asked for. And so that allowed me to just sort of like let this process organically. And so each week I learned something new about how to do this. The format has never been set. Like I adjust from month to month to month to month. And it's because it was safe, because it was open, because people were wanting to carry the messages forward, because they mattered. And it just, I'm actually starting to tear up now because it just was so, it was just, it was meant to happen. It was really fortunate.
Mm. Well, I'm sure the people were fortunate to also have you as a mediator. And, you know, this is where, after going through the trials and tribulations, this is the medicine that shines through us, each one of us, in their way. And, you know, I feel so much joy when I hear someone saying that there was a community that held them. They were heard, they were listened to, and there was this way of acceptance that happened beyond the differences, beyond the what story is mine and what story is yours, but rather how story brought us together,
Right.
and how the commonality was found.
Sure, and you touched on some kind of great things where, it wasn't a competition. Like I hate poetry slams because you do that to get the highest number of cheers. That's not the environment.
Yeah.
That the cheers come from feeling the courage of the people who are sharing. Because I remember your story, and actually you really brought home to me fears that I never really thought about as a man in these ceremonial and psychedelic spaces. Because I'm old. Nobody, women are so are particularly vulnerable in these spaces, both because they want to be helpers. Like even if it's not sexual issues, women sort of like are socialized to be helpers. So they're their labor is taken advantage of. And then you go beyond that. And so now you're taking these medicines and you're in vulnerable states. And so power things come up, and people who are in certain positions of power who haven't sorted out all their issues. Because I don't want to say anyone's a bad person, but many people who serve medicine haven't worked out their issues sufficiently to be doing it in a safe way, in a helpful way. And so that comes out in those spaces. And it was, hearing the ways in which you were injured for being such a brilliant and beautiful spirit. You were open, you made yourself vulnerable, you invited people to rely on you to help them, and yet you found yourself in a situation where people took advantage of that. And that's a lot. And to kind of like process that, and then to come back and to be where you are now, where you're sort of like, you're finding safer ways for yourself to do the work that you feel called to do. And I big hugs. I'm really proud of you. I'm so delighted that I could do something to make that happen for you, because that's like, at the end of the day, that's what Story Hour is all about. It's that sort of finding the way forward, finding a way to hold our experiences and to grow from them and to give to other people.
Indeed. Bob, wow. Yeah. And as I was saying, that time, I think the episode was released in March. Anyway, I'll put the episode in the description once this is this will be shared with everyone, and you guys can listen to it. I'm featured first, so you can cover that, and then the rest of the peeps were wonderful too, and meeting Haya also in that episode was amazing, and I'll be getting in touch with her again. And Bob, it's been the journey. To me, so far, the concept of community has been destroyed after what happened. And it's like, for me, I'm kind of reimagining community. This is what I wrote about in my latest newsletter. How can I reimagine community? Because obviously I attracted this way of living where I was talking about it lately with a very dear friend here in Mexico, and there's a big difference between servitude and service. And obviously,
Yes.
that women in general, we've been, and I'm not defining things, but we've been tainted. Our psyche has been tainted. In order to belong, there is this sense of servitude, be it in a psychological kind of way, an emotional kind of way, a physical kind of way, and also a spiritual kind of way. This is why very much of what the world of spirituality, including shamanism, includes also, or can include, this exposure, this vulnerability. And to me, I was trying to fix something that someone else had intended for it not to be like I was seeing it. and it was like I was sliding in place. Like there was like
Yeah.
kind of a flooring of oil underneath me, and I was just
Mm.
trying. And so talking about it on Ouroboros Story Hour last year was the beginning of seeing complete strangers. You were a stranger to me. I mean, you were the medium. Yes, someone put us in touch with each other, but I did not know what to do. And I did not know if it's going to be okay, but I allowed myself to share in a space where I think back then I was done with being scared. I was done
Hmm.
with being scared from people who had no power at all. And when I was touching on spaces of loving individuals, fear completely disappeared because
Right.
there was no possibility to induce harm in that kind of space, because that space was held by love. And so this helped me a lot, kind of, in the world of shamanism. Yes, we invoke, we connect, we bring in the medicine songs, we see what can happen in the energetic or spiritual realms. But if we don't see it manifesting in this realm, then there's a kind of a dissonance. There's something, either we're too much in the other realms that we're not bridging it into this realm,
Right.
or there's something that we're being delusional about. Like, I think this is what's happening. And so I would say this was one of the beginning uh, building stones, or um, pivotal points in the ongoing integration that I was going through, because I was going through the integration, but verbalizing it,
Right.
bringing the words out from the heart without
Hmm.
anger and hatred and stuff that are going to hit me back, because if I
Sure.
exude that, this is going to come back to me. So I didn't want to. I wanted to transmute things. And so again, this was a great opportunity, and that's why we are still in touch. That's why we're
Yeah.
here again.
Exactly. But as you were talking, because this is something I'm sort of like developing in my sense of sort of how I understand things and how flow works. Do you remember how your body felt when you started talking and then as you kind of like went along?
Yes, I did. And when
Can
when
you
I was
share?
when I was watching it yesterday, I was seeing that. Well, I mean, I definitely started with a constriction. The constriction was based in, where do I start? How can I start? And what is the so-called right way to start? But then, it was a little bit of background about me, where I come from. But the moment that I usually mention that I'm from Lebanon, there's this boxing. So I started from the box, actually. That's what I remember. I started from the box, and therefore my body reflected that. But then I came out, as I always do. This was the actual journey. And gradually, it was not about, uh, it was about accepting what I was sharing. And therefore, I loosened up slowly and slowly, and
Yeah.
hearing myself talking about it, and choosing again the words, but without being constipated about it.
Right. Right.
It softened my throat, it softened my heart, and it softened my whole body. Because thank you for asking this question, because I'm very kinesthetic. I
Yeah.
need to touch, I need to feel, I need to sense things physically. And so this was very physical for me, and also liberating.
Yeah, because I mean that's one thing I've been sort of noticing in those stuck places. You know, before I started any of this stuff, I was a raging materialist. I mean, you would never have heard me talking about energy flow and non-ordinary reality, and all that kind of stuff. But I've noticed that, that oftentimes when I'm afraid or I haven't sorted things out, my throat's really tight. And then as I check in, like, I'll see that there are other places in my body that are not wanting to release, and as we get going, those things just open up.
Mm.
And it's sort of like, and that comes from that ability to sort of like feel safe, get a little confidence because when you hear your voice, and as you start to give a new shape to the stories that you're telling, it really produces this full body experience
Mm.
in the telling. And I suspect that's why you were able to release. And from what I gather from having talked to lots of people who have participated in Story Hour, so like over the last, they've had those similar sorts of experiences. And like, so the body of work, such as it is, I've had hundreds and hundreds of storytellers share, and that as a that as an experience sort of like comes up very regularly. This, oh, I started feeling relaxed, and I let, and and when they find the story, and then they let go, and then they come, they'll, after the show's over, especially in live spaces where we could kind of like hang out and talk after, it was be like, I never really thought of it that way, or like I didn't know how to get started, but once I got started, it just all went, it just all flowed. And it's so brilliant it is so brilliant to witness. It really is.
This was one of the questions that came up as we were talking, which is how would this also affects you as someone who's opening somehow that space, and it does affect your body as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it also it feeds my courage, because it's not, I marvel at the courage that people show to in the things that they share. And so the way I structure a given event, I usually tell a story first, and I don't write them out anymore. I just show up. I'll kind of block out of my mind what I want to talk about, and then I let it go. And I try really hard to say things that I'm very afraid to say out loud. And so I do that. So I model, but then as I have been in this environment where people are following in kind, it's made it easier for me to be able to do that. So we were talking, I think this is probably off mic, but about the work I'm doing, and how it is that that since 2015 I've written somewhere between 8,000 and 9,000 pages of stuff. It's by developing that relationship with fear and stuckness.
And how can this expand?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of transmutation, because it's the constriction that usually pushes us through a breakthrough, right? Somehow.
I think so. Because one of the things, and this has happened in one of the books that I just finished. It's called Whiskey, Cool Jazz, and Ayahuasca. It journeys into flow state. So we oftentimes think of flow state as when our brains are in a theta wave state, and everything is, everything's groovy, you're one with the world, and the separation between you and the instrument that you're using to express what's inside, that all disappears, and the sound of the one hand clapping, all that zen bullshit. And one of the things that I have learned about flow state is that that's a dual way of looking at flow state. So the non-dual way of looking at flow state is that stuckness is flow state too. And that
Indeed.
we step back from that at some point and sort of embrace the stuckness and that ability to make everything disappear but what you're trying to say. And so together, that's the thing to strive for. Not, I want to be able to sit down for 4 hours and only words. Like, it's
Rainbows
not,
and
that's,
butterflies, yeah.
yeah, exactly like that. And that's sort of like that's a big, that, that lesson has come through Story Hour and working with medicine
Mm.
together, and to see, and seeing how people sort of navigate stuckness and navigate fear and navigate finding truth, and understanding that their perspectives and how truth sort of affects what we think about our experiences.
Mm. And how those experiences are being heard.
Hmm.
I think another part of sharing a story that is really visceral, that is really personal, that is really a story that was very deep, is to be heard by others and to know that one is witnessed, to know that
Yeah.
echo is reaching another person, another human being. I mean, for quite a while, for me, I could not connect with humans
Right.
because of what I've experienced with humans. And for a while, I was trying to connect only with trees and plants, and I'm like, and animals and the elements, the water, the mountains, because I wanted to be in spaces where I'm heard in my nakedness, in my vulnerability, in the tears, and in being there without being pitied. I wanted to be seen as
Sure.
such. And then that transitioned into reconnecting again with humans. But there was as I mentioned before, there was a complete destruction of what the concept of community was for me. But it's building in a different way now, which
Well,
is funny.
sure. And especially given, where you come from, because there's so
Yeah.
much trauma
Mm-hmm.
in the culture in that land,
Mm-hmm.
like, from the very land itself and all the people that are there. I mean, how do you, how do you kind of let some of that stuff go and open up to people? It's amazing that you can do what you do and be what you are, because we talked about this when I had a brilliant idea when we were I say that ironically, by the way. I said, let's get some Israelis and Arabs together and take, we'll take medicine, and we'll find out that we love each other. And you very gently cautioned me. You said, the trauma is really deep, and might not be sort of like the best way to, the best way to approach that. And it's just,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of brings me to this other aspect of Story Hour and your experiences and others, is that there's a time when the stories are ripe and they're ready to, they're ready to give forth their fruit or their flower. And I say that sort of like, from the point of view even of my own experience. In late February, early March, I went to Brazil for a retreat called Carnicora. So it happens during Carnival, and we drank medicine twice a day for 6 days. So this is and strong medicine, not like not your typical diamate, like powerful stuff. Plus, we worked with other
Yeah.
medicines, and it kind of like has caused a continental drift for me. And I haven't, and so like what I'm standing on is solid, but the continent itself upon which I'm standing is not solid. So I'm moving. I have not been able to really even so that we're months later, I still don't really tell stories about it, because I don't entirely understand all of what's happening, because it's happening to me right now. And so it's like, it's not ripe fruit yet to, to share with other people, other than well, check it out, man. I drank ayahuasca twice a day for 6 days, right. Because
Yeah,
but
this does not matter at all.
right.
It's
No, not
more,
at all.
yeah, as you're
Not
saying, how would that come into words at some
right.
point, or translate into words? It's the actual experience, but how this experience is translated into words, especially when it's if in flow. Now, when it comes to lands that have been through recurring traumas, recurring layering of narratives of victimization, of you don't have power, of you're gonna always, you were born like this, you're gonna be raised like this, your parents were like this, so you're gonna be like this. And it's like this requires time to untie, to untwist the narrative. And for me, this has been very much about that, and to reconnect with the land. For me, the connection with Lebanon is pure. I don't
Sure.
see Lebanon as a land on a land basis, on the spirit of the land that has been tainted. I see just the people not catching up on what the land is teaching them.
Right.
And you know, this is where we tap into ancestral storytelling, how the ancestors used to sit together around a fire, share tobacco, share food, and share their stories. This has been happening everywhere, and especially in the Middle East. I mean, when we talk about things in common, it's food. The whole Mediterranean area, it's food. And
Yes, of
that,
course.
if this is not a language, what can be a language? I don't know. But anyway, I mean, it's the same dishes. And it's like, let us compete on the Guinness book and who created the tabbouleh and who created the hummus. And it's like, Jesus is laughing at us, you know, Muhammad is
Right.
laughing at us, you know, every prophet and every enlightened or, you know, ascended master is like, what you guys still doing? Like, you know, you
Right.
speak of Allah, you speak of God. If there is this rootedness, this connection with heart, it's there. It's just distraction, the distraction into what separates us. Which, you know, when people ask me, I'm like, you can describe Lebanon as the expression of what's happening in the world in 10,000 square kilometers surface. But it's like an amplification of what's happening in the world in a spot. And, you know, you can take it from there. How would you take it is up to you. So.
Exactly. And it's fun. The ancestor thing, like, is real. I'm struggling with that a lot because when early on, when I started doing medicine work, I called out for my ancestors, and I jokingly put it this way, and this is my story for now. You know that, you know, I called them in, and they said, you know, bugger off, figure out your own stuff, and then come and talk to us. They said, you know, you're not ready for us. So okay. So fast forward to Brazil in 2022.
Mhm.
I saw my first ancestor. He came to me. So it came through the male line. A couple of weeks after I got back from Brazil, some folks from the temple, the TUS, it's a temple in Banda San Sebastian. So they're in E2 Brazil. A medicine carrier came up to here. It's actually the person who introduced me to that practice. And so I'm like, oh yeah, I got this. You know, like, I'm going to help out. You know, I'm going to drink the ayahuasca. I'm going to be on my feet the whole time, and I'm going to be a good helper. And so one of the way they work you drink the ayahuasca, and then after a little while we take a medicine called hape, or it's spelled RAPE,
Mhm.
and it's a tobacco snuff, and it's sort of a grounding male spirit thing. And I usually love it. And so I take the hape, you know, I'm on my knees, and I kind of spread my arms out, and I called upon my line. I said, you know, I said, my ancestors from my mom's side and from my dad's side, I said, you know, I need guidance, help, you know, tell me, you know, I'm trying to figure out where, you know, where to go next. Please, you know, please come to me. So what did they do? They shared with me, I got the full lines dose of suffering. It was like this, and I couldn't get off the floor. And you know, there in Ubanda, there's a lot of dancing, and so the person holding space came to me and said, you know, got to get up, you know, get the oxygen going, get your body moving. And I said, no, my ancestors told me I have to feel this. I have to stay here, and I have to feel this. And so I did, and it was awful. I mean, it was truly, you know, it was just, I mean, because I come from peasants in every area of my line comes from serfs, peasants. And so I get all this stuff. And then last week I went off to do this MDMA thing in New York City and it was a ceremonial thing, not a party thing. And the kind of like the takeaway was the gratitude. Like they persisted despite all of that. And so I was kind of like, they shared with me the thing that they needed for me to know. And then they said it was my job to heal the line. And I was like, yeah, thanks. So, yeah, thanks a lot. But that like that ancestor thing, like it's truly so powerful that it's sort of like, how do you sort of like take in all of the difficulties that have come before? Because like you talk about like like going back to sitting around the fire and sharing food. Evidently that wasn't in my line. And I think that for a lot of people it's not. And so it's sort of like, how do we make room for that? How do we take it in? How do we let it wash through? And then if we do that, the shamanic thing, like the Red Road North American Indian thing, if you heal yourself, you heal seven generations back and 7 generations forward. And, what an honor to be able to, to have that opportunity.
Yes, as you're speaking, I have goosebumps all around. When we talk about ancestors, I mean, when we talk about storytelling, and I mean, somehow there's a relaying in how you're expressing your own way of connecting with the medicine in an ancestral way is through also storytelling. For me, part of my journey, an essential part, the most part of my journey was about healing that part, what came before. And I think this is why it was so brutal. I had obviously, now that I'm laughing about it, I had no idea. I was stepping into that. I had no idea I was gonna work, or not work, but be in the world of shamanism, because to me this is not work. This is life. That's a way of living. I tried to remove myself from that world many times, and it's like the spirits are kind of pulling me back in, and they're like, it's either you have both legs in or you're out. But if you're out, you're out. You're not being really this embodiment of your wholeness. And the way for me to kind of neutralize all the conditionings based on religious beliefs, twisted ways of connecting with what has religion done to that part of the world, and how it was embedded in the psyche, and how it separated people from God.
Right. I know, isn't it crazy?
It never made sense to me. I grew up as a Catholic, and it's like, there's something that is weird here. I don't feel love. What is going on? And so it was a kind of a deconstruction, a dismantling. I mean, this is why it was so painful. When I think about it, it's like, of course, you delved into that world, not knowing what you were looking for in terms of, but you knew that there was this deep sadness, but you had no idea that this sadness was connected to your whole lineage. And it starts with you, as the message came through to you, which is, you're going to start doing this, because it's not, it's like you do have a choice, but it's going to be very hard not to choose that choice.
Yep. Well,
to run away from it somehow. And it's like, I kind of jumped into that abyss. And
that's exactly right. Really, my whole life fell apart in my early 50s, and it was like, oh, you're not going to pay attention to this? Pay attention. And even sort of like in calling out for ancestors, my assumption, like the story I told myself, when I made that call was that somewhere along the line, there were some people who knew what the hell they were doing and were going to sort of like help um, bolster my strength to do this work. And they said, "Oh no, you already are like you're strong enough, and you're even strong enough to feel our pain." And it's just I did not intend to sort of like end up in this place. I did not intend to even think about my ancestors. I was worried about keeping my house, feeding my kids, and not dying. And then here we are, like all these 7 years later, right? And like, yikes.
Yeah. It's
And
amazing.
I wanted to say one thing, and you have returned the gift of being able to find words for an experience, because I really have not figured out how to sort of like process my experience in Brazil, and sort of like in this moment, it helped me give a shape to that. And so thank you.
Oh, it's just we're in flow, and that's I really feel just this great vibe in the space, this sense of love, this sense of connection. And I mean, this is what my intention is. I don't prepare for this. I don't really, as you do it, it's like
Yeah.
improvisation, and just being guided by the spirit, the medicine, really
Yeah.
the medicine spirits, the guides, the spirit guides, and a candle lit, a little bit of intention with smudging, and there we go, we start. So where do you see Ouroboros Story Hour going next?
Okay. I've been on hiatus since
We have been,
January.
many of us have been.
Yeah. What ended up happening was that you during the pandemic times, there was sort of enough energy exchange to keep things moving, and for me to feel like, all right, this is a worthwhile thing for me to do. So like, obviously, like I'm not looking to get rich from this, and by energy exchange, I mean people helping out financially.
Of course.
And there, after when the pandemic hit and we were not meeting in person, there was no way to sort of like pass a hat, and so there was no social pressure to contribute, and there were many added costs to me to be able to put Story Hour on in Zoom space, like expensive microphones, fancy cameras, different software packages to process all that stuff. And it started feeling like all the energy was going out and not coming in. And so as that was happening, the flow was kind of pushing me in this poetry direction. So I said, all right, I'm going to go here. I'm going to trust that. And so since January, I've put together all those collections that you mentioned before. And so here I am now. It's this is June, so August is anniversary. So this would be the 6th anniversary. I'm in the process right now, sort of like making room in my head and my heart to resume and to do some stuff in live spaces. I have some tentative plans with some folks. So going forward, what I'm hoping to do are a couple of things. So one is to reopen in-person space, and to sort of like have that, and the other is to continue to do the online stuff. That was such a wonderful opportunity, because I was able to connect with people all around the world. So you and I connected. I've connected with people from South Africa, from different parts of Europe, from South America. And so it's kind of like broadened the storytelling base, as it were. But more importantly, it's giving voices, it's inviting voices into the conversation that at least Americans don't typically have access to. We live in our little bubble, and, we think the whole world is like us, and the whole world revolves around us. And like in part sort of does because of the dollar, but there's all this other stuff going on out there in the world that we kind of like don't connect with. And so I want to like keep that piece of it going so that we can, you know, so that we can continue to have those like broader conversations, and also to create this repository of material that people can come back to and listen and have it persist beyond the moment. So I guess where I'm hoping to go is by August, I want to sort of like get back in the saddle, as it were, and sort of resume operations. But I have to. One of the things holding me back right now is kind of like figuring out. I hate this word, but you know, so I have to figure out how to monetize the project, at least so that when I'm spending 30, 40 hours a week editing and doing all the other stuff, that I'm taking away from other ways I can make money. So, you know, I need to kind of like figure out how to make that work in a more reciprocal fashion.
Yeah, yeah, and it's all about reciprocity. If there's no reciprocity, then it just doesn't work. People meet with you as you are meeting with them, and that's how it goes. And you know, we need spaces like this, and we need people mediating those spaces in different parts of the world, in different locations. I find that, you know, being in person helps a lot. For me, like, I really find that being with others in ceremony is completely different than doing, like, mediating a moon ceremony online, for example, a full moon or a new moon ceremony online. Yes, the energy, the connection is there, but being in the presence of others, feeling each other's presence, and especially with people who are going through a lot at the moment, that state of not being able to connect with others, to relay things in words, to feel emotionally safe, to feel that it's fine. What I'm going through is part of what everyone is going through, and it's not only personal. It's personal and beyond personal and transpersonal. So.
Yep, exactly. And the other thing is that at the end of the day, it's energetically not healthy.
Indeed.
To either way, to always give or to always take.
Oh yeah, big lesson in my life.
Right, you know, like there needs to be, and it's what makes Story Hour work when it works really well is when there's that flow between everyone. There in one of the things that this is like sort of an American culture thing, but back in the 60s when the Grateful Dead were getting their start and they were running around with Ken Kesey and dropping acid and doing the acid test and the bus and all that stuff, like one of their goals was always to blur the boundaries between performer and receiver. And so they fed each other with food. They fed each other with sustenance. They fed each other by being in the space together. And so, you know, we have, I mean, like the Dead don't like the Grateful Dead, you know, they became this amazing cultural phenomenon precisely because they gave as much as they took, and the people who followed them did the same thing. And it's sort of like, if I can get this to work right, that's really where I'm trying to go with this, is that sort of like be together, give and take, so that we can sustain this over time. Yeah, and therefore keep this going for however long it's going to serve. You know, this is what every kind of spaces is about, other than consumerism-based spaces. And I think this is what is being redefined in our world in so many ways, where it's like, instead of this I have to say the word vampiric way of doing things, where one is going, and I've experienced it many times, where people would come to ceremonies that I'm offering and they're expecting a performer. It's like, okay, what are you going to offer us today? And I'm like, and I would feel it in the space in the beginning, and I would stand up and I would say, I'm not here to perform. And if you're expecting performance from me, good for you, but this is not going to be the case. Get ready for something else. Get ready for something deeper. When we scratch the surface of that conditioning, this is what attracts people who are resonating at this frequency. And that's the beauty of it, where this invitation is welcome and there's more harmony within in terms of value.
how am I valuing myself? Not taking things, to this level of how important I am. No, but the work, the
Right.
intention that is being set in the space, the intention that is being offered, is it being received by others? So I invite everyone who's listening to this to, if they want to get in touch with you, what would be the references that you would like to share with them? I would add those references anyway in the description.
Sure.
But
All right. So by email, you can get in touch with me, and this is all one word, Ouroboros Story Hour at gmail.com. That's, you can get to me directly. And I'm also, I have a lot of the content on Facebook in the Ouroboros Story Hour business page or whatever they call it. So you can get there too at the ampersand. So the at Ouroboros Story Hour, all one word. And then you can kind of drop in there. I also have a private community. So I don't just, I vet who ends up coming there. So it's not closed, but it's also not completely open. And it's the Ouroboros Story Hour group. And so you can come there and share. And I invite people who are in this space, who are doing this kind of work, to share what they're involved with as well, so that we can mutually support each other. But those would be the best ways to get in touch with me. So Ouroboros Story Hour at gmail.com, and then you could do at Ouroboros Story Hour on Facebook, and that'll bring you to content. I've also got a YouTube page, so it would be youtube.com/Ouroboros Story Hour, but I haven't that's something I started recently and haven't built out all of the content there. And so, and then someday I'll get a website, but I don't want to spend my time trying to build a website right now.
Yeah, it's not a priority, but there's several platforms. So as you heard, there's going to be also, I'm going to add your information in the description of this video, and this will be shared on my YouTube channel, of Inspirited YouTube channel, and obviously we'll be sharing it on different platforms together. Bob, I would love for us to sit again in such spaces. This is something that I really, really enjoy, and hopefully this, sending it into the universe and seeing how that would work out. And I would like to really thank you for you. I would like to thank you for being who you are. And just being someone who's mediating so much without the drama around things, and just the light show. And there's a lot of people doing this different kind of work that are also translating the work of the medicine that they have learned over time and integrating it in different ways. So thank you again. I really appreciate your presence here. And would you like to add anything else before we close?
Sure. So first, Maya, the feeling is very mutual. And as you were talking about connecting, I hope that we get a time to connect in 3D, in the 3D world. I feel, I think I told you this before. I think of you often, and you made a big impression on me when you appeared on Story Hour. And it's always like, you're in, I carry you in my heart all the time. And so because I appreciate what you did. I really appreciate all the nice things that you said about me. This is no joke. I have a really hard time taking in things when people say nice things about me. And today I felt less uncomfortable about that than usual. So that's kudos to you. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone that's listening. Support Maya's project. She's an extraordinary human being who's got, I'll leave it at that. So thank you. Big hugs. And yeah.
All right, we'll leave it there until we meet again in form or online. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode. Much love and many blessings. Much gratitude for tuning in and listening. If you got inspired by this episode, please spread the inspiration around you. Add a review or a comment here. And if you are in need for guidance in your spiritual journey, do get in touch via my website, www.inspirited.world. Many blessings in love and medicine.